At 3 a.m. in a busy Chicago trauma unit, a fine-gauge syringe rests between an ER nurse's fingers under flickering neon light. The danger is not only the medicine, the monitor, or the room moving too fast. It is the tired mind pretending it can still afford to drift. Most people think focus fails loudly. It usually fails in a smaller place, the half second when the hand becomes automatic, when burnout whispers, "Just get through it," and precision starts to blur. The smell of antiseptic hangs in the air. Cold steel presses against her palm. Somewhere behind her, a voice calls out. Somewhere inside her, exhaustion asks for one careless inch. So what separates a person who is merely surviving the night from one who can still be trusted inside it? This is Zanshin, the discipline of returning completely to the smallest detail before the moment decides for you. The ER nurse does not have the luxury of falling apart in a clean, cinematic way. There is no dramatic pause where the hallway goes silent and the camera pulls close to her face while she discovers some hidden strength. The unit keeps moving. Shoes squeak over polished floors. A trauma cart rattles past. A monitor complains in the corner with that thin, repeating sound that makes time feel smaller than it is. Somebody asks for an update. Somebody else is already reaching for another tray. And in the middle of all of it, her hand is still holding the fine-gauge syringe. That is what makes the moment cruel. Burnout does not always show up as collapse. Sometimes it shows up as speed. A little too much confidence in muscle memory. A little less respect for the object in your hand. The thought that you have done this 1,000 times, so tonight should be no different. But tonight is different because the body is tired. Her shoulders have been up near her ears for hours. Her lower back has that dull, private ache she stopped noticing around midnight. There is a paper cup of coffee on a counter somewhere behind her, gone cold and untouched. Her phone has 3 unread texts from someone who has learned not to expect a reply during night shift. She saw them earlier and locked the screen without answering. Not because she did not care. Because caring had become another task she did not have room to carry. That is the part nobody sees when they praise focus. They see the badge. The scrubs. The quick hands. The calm voice. They do not see the human being under it, standing in the blue-white flicker of a Chicago trauma unit at 3 a.m., trying to be accurate while her own life waits in small neglected corners. Burnout does not ask permission before it enters the hand. It starts behind the eyes. The room gets a little flatter. The voices begin to blend. The smell of antiseptic becomes so familiar it almost disappears. Cold steel touches the skin, but the mind stops receiving the message. The nurse is still there, still moving, still answering, still doing the job. But some part of her has stepped back from the present moment, not out of weakness, but out of survival. That distance can feel like protection. If she lets herself feel everything in the room, every alarm, every frightened face, every consequence attached to every motion, the weight could become too much. So the mind builds a small wall. It says, keep moving. It says, do not think. It says, finish the task. And for many parts of life, that wall might get a person through the hour. But craftsmanship does not live behind a wall. P2, Zanshin, is not just awareness in a peaceful room. It is awareness when the room is trying to steal awareness from you. It is the discipline of staying with the exact detail in front of you while fatigue, noise, urgency, and emotion all compete for command. For an ER nurse, that discipline is not abstract. It is in the wrist. It is in the eyes. It is in the way her thumb does not rush because the hallway is rushing. It is in the respect she gives to a small tool when the world around her makes small things feel disposable. The fine-gauge syringe is almost too delicate for the room. Everything else feels heavy, the doors, the equipment, the overhead lights, the pressure in people's voices. But the syringe is narrow, precise, unforgiving in its need for attention. It does not care how long her shift has been. It does not care that she skipped dinner or that her patience is thinning. It asks for one thing only: be here. That request can feel unfair when a person is exhausted. There is a private resentment that can rise in work like this, a resentment so quiet the nurse may not even call it by name. Why does every moment require all of me? Why can't one thing be easy? Why does the smallest step still matter when I have already given everything tonight? That is the shadow in the room. Constant burnout against the need for absolute focus. And the dangerous part is that burnout does not announce itself like an enemy. It can sound reasonable. It can sound practical. It can sound like, you know what you're doing. It can sound like, don't overthink. It can sound like, hurry up, everyone is waiting. It uses the language of efficiency to hide the decay of attention. There is one version of her that obeys that voice. That version tightens her jaw and moves faster than the moment deserves. She lets the noise behind her set the tempo of her hand. She treats the syringe like an obstacle between her and the next task. Her eyes glance, but do not settle. Her breathing gets shallow. She is not careless in the obvious sense. She is worse than careless. She is almost careful. Almost careful is where many people lose themselves. Not just nurses. Parents do it when they answer a child with half a mind after a brutal day. Drivers do it on an empty freeway when the late-night lights smear together. Students do it when the page is open but their attention has already left the desk. Workers do it when the tool in their hand becomes familiar enough to stop being honored. The problem is not that they do not care. The problem is that they care through a tired nervous system, and tiredness makes the present moment feel negotiable. In the trauma unit, the nurse feels that negotiation begin. Her hand pauses for a fraction of a second. The syringe catches the neon light. A clean, thin line. Antiseptic in the air. Cold steel nearby. The monitor still beeping. The room still asking. Her exhaustion does not vanish. Her resentment does not apologize and leave. Her body does not suddenly become fresh. But Zonchen does not require freshness. It requires return. The disciplined mind does not need the room to become quiet before it becomes accurate. It does not need the body to feel inspired before it respects the task. The nurse does not have to become emotionless. She has to notice the exact point where fatigue starts negotiating with precision. That point is where the real confrontation happens. Not between her and the trauma unit. Not between her and the long shift. Not even between her and the life-saving medicine waiting to be administered. The confrontation is between the part of her that wants to become automatic and the part of her that still knows a human life is never routine. The room will not give her peace. So she must create a small piece of order inside the reach of her own hand. She lets the syringe become more than a tool. It becomes the boundary between drifting and returning. The thin barrel, the measured weight, the cool surface under her fingers, each detail pulls her back from the fog. She does not need to solve burnout in that second. She cannot repair every hour that led to this moment. She cannot answer the unread texts. She cannot drink the cold coffee. She cannot make the fluorescent light stop flickering. She can do one thing. She can refuse to let exhaustion decide the quality of her attention. That is the harsh mercy of craftsmanship. It does not ask how you feel before it asks whether your hand is honest. It does not flatter your sacrifice. It does not excuse your sloppiness because you have suffered. It simply places a small object in front of you and asks whether you are still willing to see it clearly. The nurse inhales once, not dramatically, not deeply enough for anyone to notice. Just enough to find the room again. The smell of antiseptic returns. The cold steel returns. The fine gauge syringe returns. And with it, the truth of the golden hour. Sometimes the difference between burnout and mastery is not a grand decision. It is the exhausted hand choosing, for one more second, to become precise again. Training begins before the medicine is administered. It begins in the small moment when the nurse realizes her hand has started moving faster than her attention. That is the first gate. No one else sees it. The room is still loud. The lights still flicker with that sickly neon pulse. The smell of antiseptic still sits in the back of her throat. A voice behind her says something urgent, and another voice answers before she can even turn. But inside the reach of her own hand, she catches the drift. Her fingers are on the fine gauge syringe. Not gripping. Not squeezing. Holding. She lets that difference matter. The exhausted mind wants to make every task one long hallway. Get this done, then the next, then the next, then the next. That is how burnout stretches time until everything feels like one blurred demand. The nurse interrupts it by narrowing the world. Not the whole unit. Not the whole night. Not the weight of the profession. Just the syringe between her fingers and the next correct motion. Her first act is not heroic. She lowers her shoulders. The movement is barely visible. A small drop away from the ears, a release in the neck, the kind of thing that would look like nothing on camera unless you knew what had been locked there for hours. But the body hears it. The mind hears it too. Her shoulders dropping tell the exhausted part of her that urgency is present, but panic is not in command. Then she adjusts her feet. One shoe settles flat against the hospital floor. Then the other. The polished tile is hard under her soles. The body wants to lean forward into the rush, to get pulled by the current of the trauma unit. She refuses that pull by giving her weight a place to land. Burnout floats. Presence has weight. The syringe remains in her hand. She turns it slightly, enough for the barrel to catch the cold light. The fine line of it brings her eyes back from the room. She does not stare in a trance. She simply looks with respect. The tool is small, but the moment is not. The size of an object does not measure the size of its consequence. That is one of the quiet laws of craftsmanship. A careless person only respects what looks dramatic. A trained person respects the detail before it becomes dramatic. The nurse lets her thumb settle where it belongs. She feels the texture of the syringe, the slight coolness against her skin, the controlled resistance in the mechanism. She does not rush to prove she can handle pressure. She has nothing to prove to the room. The room will always ask for more. Her duty is to give the next action the attention it requires. Burnout tries again. It says, "You have done this before." She answers without words by checking what is in front of her. Not because she doubts herself in some theatrical way. Because precision is not an insult to experience. Precision is how experience stays clean. A veteran hand can become dangerous when it begins to treat familiarity as permission. So she lets the ritual protect her from pride and fatigue at the same time. Her eyes move deliberately. Label. Dose. Patient. Route. Time. The words are not a checklist in her mind so much as a sequence of doors she refuses to skip. Each one makes the hallway shorter. Each one keeps her from trying to carry the entire night at once. The mind under burnout wants to blur categories together. Zanshin separates them. One thing, then one thing, then one thing. A monitor beeps sharply. Someone brushes past her left side. The old version of her would have tightened, maybe snapped a quick answer, maybe let irritation become speed. She feels that impulse. It is real. The need to defend her own exhaustion rises like heat under the skin. She has been asked for too much by too many people for too many hours, and some part of her wants the room to know it. But the syringe does not need her resentment. It needs her hand. So she lets the irritation pass through the jaw without becoming language. Her teeth unclench. Her tongue leaves the roof of her mouth. She takes one breath through the antiseptic smell and lets the cold air remind her that she is still in a body, still in a room, still inside one exact second. That breath is not decoration. It is a tool. Not a spiritual performance. Not a break from responsibility. It is the smallest possible reset between the urge to react and the choice to return. The breath gives her enough space to avoid handing the syringe to the exhausted version of herself. Then she does something even smaller. She slows her hand. Only by a fraction. Not enough to delay what must be done. Enough to make sure speed is serving accuracy, not replacing it. There is a kind of slowness that is laziness, and there is a kind of slowness that saves the quality of action. In the golden hour, the second kind matters. Her hand moves with economy. No wasted flourish. No shaking off the pressure. No dramatic stillness. Just clean motion. The trauma unit continues around her. A curtain snaps on its rail. Rubber wheels pass over a seam in the floor. The neon light flickers again. Her eyes do not chase every movement. They receive the room without surrendering to it. That is Zanshin under pressure, not tunnel vision, not scattered attention, but a wide enough awareness to know what is happening and a narrow enough focus to do what must be done. She places the syringe where it needs to be. Before the final movement, she pauses at the edge of action. This pause is not hesitation. It is command. Hesitation asks, "Can I handle this?" Command asks, "Is the next movement correct?" There is a difference. One comes from fear. The other comes from respect. The nurse feels the cold steel near her hand. She smells the antiseptic. She hears the room without letting the room enter her fingers. The fine-gauge syringe is no longer just an object she is using. It is the point where her scattered mind gathers itself. In another life, another room, the same training appears differently. A father stops before answering too sharply. A student places both hands on the desk before opening the exam. A driver at 3 a.m. turns down the radio and names the next exit. A worker wipes the tool before using it because the tool deserves attention and so does the task. None of them are escaping pressure. They are shrinking the battle to the place where command is still possible. For the nurse, that place is here. Her hand. The syringe. The cold light. The medicine. The patient in front of her. The tiredness still inside her. She does not defeat burnout in one perfect act. That would be a lie. Burnout is heavier than one breath and older than one shift. But she can deny it one thing, the right to make this moment careless. So she repeats the ritual. Shoulders down. Feet grounded. Eyes clear. Breath received. Hand slowed. Tool respected. Next action only. After enough nights, The ritual becomes a path the mind can find in the dark. The body learns where to return when the room becomes too loud. The hand learns that pressure does not get to set its rhythm. The eyes learn to honor the small thing before the large consequence arrives. That is the shugyo of precision. Not punishing yourself through exhaustion. Not pretending you are made of steel. Not worshipping overwork because the world praises people who disappear into duty. The training is more honest than that. It teaches the nurse to remain human without becoming sloppy, tired without becoming absent, pressured without becoming careless. The fine gauge syringe rests between her fingers like a question. Can you still be here? At 3 a.m., under flickering neon, with antiseptic in the air and cold steel at her palm, she answers through the only language craftsmanship trusts. The next movement is exact. The room does not become gentle. That would be the lie a weaker story would tell. The Chicago trauma unit is still bright in the wrong way, still crowded, still full of machines that do not care how tired a human being is. The neon light still flickers above her. The antiseptic smell still clings to the air. Cold steel still flashes in the corner of her vision when someone opens a tray. Nothing outside her has agreed to calm down. But the nurse is standing differently now. Not taller in some heroic way. Not reborn. Not untouched by the night. Her shoulders still remember the hours behind her. Her eyes still carry the dry sting of 3 a.m. Somewhere behind the thin wall of focus, the unanswered texts are still waiting on her phone. The cold coffee is still on the counter. The shift is not over just because she found one clean breath. But her hand is no longer being dragged by the room. That is the change. Earlier, the fine gauge syringe had almost become another object in the blur, another step in the machinery of the night. Now it sits inside her attention with a different weight. Not heavy. Worthy. She notices the barrel. The line. The slight pressure under her thumb. The exactness asked of her. She does not worship the tool. She respects it. There is a difference. Worship makes an object mystical. Respect makes the hand responsible. The room keeps moving, but it no longer gets to move her from the inside. A cart passes behind her. Someone speaks too quickly. A curtain pulls hard on its rail. For a moment, irritation rises again, sharp and familiar. She feels the old argument forming in her body: I am tired, I am overworked, I am being asked for too much, and nobody sees it. All of that may be true. But truth does not automatically deserve the wheel. She lets the feeling exist without giving it her fingers. Her jaw tightens once, then releases. Her breath stays small but usable. Her eyes return to the task, not because she has stopped being human, but because the human being in front of her needs the trained part of her to remain present. This is where the transformation becomes real. Not when burnout disappears. When burnout is present and no longer allowed to steer the smallest movement. The medicine is administered with the kind of precision no one applauds. There is no music. No speech. No slow motion proof that a lesson has landed. Just an exhausted nurse in a hard-lit room doing the next correct thing with a fine-gauge syringe while the rest of the night keeps pressing against her. And after the moment passes, she does not collapse into pride. She checks the room again. That matters. The undisciplined mind wants drama after pressure. It wants a reward, a complaint, a witness, a chance to say, "Do you see what I just carried?" And maybe, later, someone should see it. Maybe the world should be more honest about what night shift workers are asked to absorb. But in the golden hour, she cannot spend attention on being recognized. She places the syringe down with care. That simple act contains more than it seems. At the beginning of the night, putting down a tool might have been automatic. Now the motion has an ending. She does not toss the moment behind her as if it meant nothing. She completes it. She gives the object back to the world in order. The anchor has changed. In the beginning, the syringe exposed the danger of a tired mind. In the middle, it became the point of return. Now it becomes a record of who she chose to be while no part of the room made that choice easy. Her exhaustion is still there. It has not been conquered. It has not been transformed into some clean motivational fuel. It waits in her back, her eyelids, her unanswered life outside the hospital. But it is no longer invisible to her. She has seen the exact place where it tries to become carelessness. Once you see that place, you cannot pretend the drift is harmless. Zanshin is not a permanent state. It is a return practice so many times that the body remembers the road back. The nurse turns toward the next sound. Her shoes make a quiet shift on the polished floor. She receives the room again: monitor, footsteps, antiseptic, cold steel, breath. The same details that almost overwhelmed her now become markers. They tell her where she is. They keep her from floating away into fatigue. A less trained version of the night would have turned every alarm into an accusation. Now each sound becomes information. A less trained version of her hand would have tried to outrun the pressure. Now the hand waits for accuracy before speed. That does not make her less tired. It makes her more trustworthy while tired. And that is a harder victory than confidence. Confidence can be loud. Confidence can be faked. Confidence can become a mask people wear when they are afraid to admit they are near the edge. Trustworthiness is quieter. It shows up in the wrist when no one is watching the wrist. It shows up in the pause before the next motion. It shows up in the way a person refuses to let exhaustion lower their standard without their consent. The trauma unit still belongs to urgency. But inside her reach, there is a small territory of order. That territory is not protected by mood. It is protected by ritual. Shoulders down. Feet grounded. Eyes clear. Breath received. Hand slowed. Tool respected. Next action only. She does not say those words out loud. She does not need to. The body knows the pattern now. The mind has walked it once under pressure, and the next time the room becomes too bright and too loud, the path will be easier to find. This is the real transformation of craftsmanship. A person stops waiting to feel ready before becoming precise. The nurse moves on. Another task waits. Another voice calls. Another demand forms before the last one has fully left her body. She is still one person inside a system that can ask more than one person should have to give. Samurai discipline does not romanticize that. It does not call exhaustion noble just because it is useful to someone else. It asks a sharper question. When the world has already taken too much from you, will you still protect the quality of the next thing your hand touches? Her answer is not perfect. It cannot be. There will be other nights when her patience thins, when the coffee goes cold again, when her phone stays unanswered, when burnout speaks in a voice that sounds almost reasonable. She will not win forever because no one wins forever. But tonight, at 3 a.m., under flickering neon, with antiseptic in the air and cold steel near her palm, she wins one exact second. Then another. Then the one after that. The fine-gauge syringe is no longer just a needle. It is proof that the smallest detail can become a gate back into command. Precision is how the exhausted hand remembers its honor. The lesson does not stay in the trauma unit. It follows you into the kitchen when you are too tired to answer kindly. It follows you into the car when the late-night road starts to blur. It follows you to the desk when one small task begins to feel beneath your full attention. You may not hold a fine-gauge syringe at 3 a.m. under flickering neon. But you have your own needle. A sentence. A tool. A promise. A choice that looks small until carelessness touches it. So before the next moment takes your hand, return. Lower the shoulders. Feel the floor. Look at the object in front of you as if your character passes through it. The battlefield is often quiet enough to miss. And mastery begins when the smallest detail becomes worthy of your full attention.